Okay, well, let's get started. So upcoming, just want to let you know that we have the Gyotaku printing workshop with Dwight Long on October 21st and 22nd. You can register for that through.
It'll be online.
Online.
And it's not quite up yet, but the tickets will be up by the end of this month.
And October 21st is one for adults, the other one will be for kids.
Right, so October 21st is for adults and October 22nd will be for kids. Also wanted to point out that this beautiful exhibit will be coming down in October, and so Saturday, October 22nd is your last day to view it here in the gallery. The other major upcoming is November 5th with the Museum of the Aleutians membership dinner and auction. That's going to be at 6 p.m. at Margaret Bay Cafe. Okay, so tonight, what I want to talk to you about is a little brief, very brief overview of the archaeological record in the Aleutians. Just the game field that we play on when we do archaeology out here, if you will. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about archaeology for the future, which I think it has been a trend for some time now, and it's really gaining a lot more steam here in the first couple of decades of the 21st century. And that is public archaeology and the concept of stewardship. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the community archaeology programs going on at MODA since 2017. I'll leave time for Q&A, and just a reminder, please remember to fill out your survey. Okay. So, as I've said, some of you have heard me say it before, when I think of Aleutian archaeology and the record that we have here, I think of deep time and big geography. We cover a lot of space, all the way from the western end of the Alaska Peninsula. Good grief.
Yeah.
Wrong buttons. Sorry, guys. Going back. There we go. It's this one. Okay. Western end of the Alaska Peninsula, all the way, including the Shimogan Islands out here, and then all the way out to Attu. That's all a Nungan cultural zone. And so we cover basically that entire region. Right now, there's about 2,000 sites recorded in the state's database, but that's given the amount of space that we're covering and the difficulty of surveying and identifying those sites, especially those that are older and more deeply buried. This is the tip of the iceberg, 2,000, I'd say. I want to remind you that we have 9,000 years of human history here, at least, often stacked up in these prominent midden deposits. And in the Aleutians, we see a very unique adaptation in terms of subsistence and lifeways in general, where the majority of the diet and technological implements come from the marine ecosystems that are exploited. And so we have a specialized marine adaptation going back 9,000 years. Hunting, sea mammal hunting and fishing being key to that, and of course watercraft are necessary, as these islands have essentially always been islands and needed to be reached by water. So this is just a quick breakdown of what the sequence looks like, how archaeologists like to divide up time in the Aleutians. We have, and I got this up here this time, BP means before present, just some archaeology jargon. But so we have the earliest Anagula phase, which is the very first inhabitants out in the Aleutian Islands that we're aware of. And they are characterized by a use of a projectile point that is armed not with a stone tip, but rather with microblades, which are going to be little razor-like pieces driven off of a core this size. So a very different projectile technology than we're going to see later in time. Some of the most well-known sites, there are only 3 actually to begin, but 2 of them are here on Hog Island in Unalaska Bay, the Russian spruce and the Okanagan site. And then the 3rd is over off Umnak Island in Nikolsky Bay on the island of Anagula. During this early phase, the early Anagula phase, we don't see evidence for substantial habitations. We see shallow depressions and tent posts, where posts which we interpret as being supports for tent-like structures. So we assume these people were fairly mobile, but we don't know exactly what their settlement pattern was like. Moving on to the late Anagula phase, which is interestingly almost absent between 7 and 6,000 years ago. We really don't see late Anagula phase sites until about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And so there's kind of a gap, which may be related to the explosive eruption of Makushan volcano and Okmok volcano on Umnak at 9,000 years ago. But in any case, there's a little bit of a gap there, but by 5,000, we're definitely seeing more permanent structures, investment in more permanent structures, and the early stages of this sort of bin deposits starting to be developed. So now we know people are exploiting shellfish resources, other reef resources, as well as hunting sea mammals and fish. The Margaret Bay phase is kind of a little interlude. It's very short-lived, and it's marked mostly by the appearance of these very small projectile points, which we associate with the bow and arrow. So we think that the introduction of the bow and arrow happened at this time, and that leads us to speculate that there is connection between peoples on the Alaska Peninsula and the Monongahela living in the Aleutian Islands. In addition to the projectile technology, the Margaret Bay phase is also notable because this is where we start to see the stone-lined houses and the winterized housing and the underlying, the indoor hearths with channels for heat inside the structures. So it's a very cold time, and the houses reflect that need, those heavy winter conditions. The Amackinac phase, most notably from the Amackinac Bridge site, is known for development of very large villages, sizable villages with hundreds of occupants. These stone-lined houses, as I mentioned, reflecting the cold aspect of the very end of that cold snap. And then you get these more squared to oval houses with side rooms. And it's also known for a proliferation of bone technology, including ornamental objects. And then when we're in the late Aleutian phase, this is the one that runs right up until the time that the Russians happened out this way. And this time is known for, this is essentially the phase that Anungan were in. This is the lifestyle, the lifeways that were occurring in the 18th century when Russians arrived and started to document things like living and site organization and whatnot. Now we can actually have a record of it in addition to the archaeology. But this phase is notable mostly because we see a population expansion around 1,000 years ago, and also the introduction of new tool types, including these slate ulus and other objects which suggest again some contact with peoples in the east. Maybe the Supiaq again within the Kodiak area, even. Let's see where we at. So it's just a brief overview, a reminder for those of you who know, and an introduction for those of you who this is new for. So why archaeology? Basically, we ask questions about past lifeways, right? We use different geologic strata and objects and to look at people's lifeways in the past. And some people would say that the way archaeological sites are stacked up is sort of like a layer cake. And if you Google layer cake archaeology, some really funny things come up. People have gotten very creative with their baking. And I was really tempted to show you every one of them. But I let it go with this because it is illustrative. So it is. Layers stack up over time, right? And so we see, and what we get to do as archaeologists is to use specific methods, very carefully remove these layers. We don't go grabbing out of each and every one as we see something interesting. They're yummy that we want to taste, right? We start at the top and we work our way down. And so this is just an example of a profile and the kinds of information you get just out of the layering of the site, right? So in this one, these folks here, this is out in on Carlisle Island. These folks are looking at this profile. They're looking at a space of a cave here. That's Jenny, I think. Right. And then this is what they're seeing. Okay. So we have the surface. Then we have recent disturbed dirt, the sod level. We have an ash sequence right here, a tephra, and then midden deposit. So this is all dense with fishbone, lithics, et cetera, lithic artifacts, whatnot. And then each of the red dots or triangles marks a radiocarbon date. So you can see how it lines up nicely through time as we work our way down through the strata. In addition to this midden up on top, which would be one time period, one life wave, at 2,200 years ago, we see that, 1,500 years before, there was no midden here, and there was probably a house, and that's what this depression here represents. This is actually a wall, so we didn't get to excavate into the rest of the house, but we can read that in the stratigraphy, that we're on the edge of a living structure there. And this black layer through here with the radiocarbon date on it is another living surface over that house after it was abandoned. Okay, so that's these sites in this way are served sort of like a vault. They're a vault where they contain information about human history in a particular time and place, and they're a vault for environmental history in a particular time and place. And so with the proper methods, the idea is that we can get into these sites and we can read them like a book, right? In a lot of ways. So we do things like expose a large amount of area so we can look at the relationships between artifacts, structural elements, etc. We can see the way the bones or the wood lie, together and form represent a collapsed structure. We look at the stratigraphy as we work our way down. We start at the top, and here we have Shonen, but then underneath it we have houses. So we can see the change in time here, and we can document that. We screen everything carefully with water whenever we can, and in this case, we're collecting every tiny little piece of urchin shell so that our colleagues here can estimate the health of the urchin population at that particular time period. In addition, we collect all kinds of fishbone and every piece of lithic because no artifact on its own is ever going to tell you the story of the book. We have to have them. We have to have them all. We have to recover them in a careful and controlled manner. And when we do that, when we approach a site like this, and we bring all this material back to the museum and we curate it, then we've created an archive that is going to live in the museum. It is going to be accessible for future research. We can answer our research questions, the reason that we opened the site in the first place, but then we also have everything recorded and documented and preserved for future research, because we can't even begin to imagine what the new research questions, of the next coming decades are going to be. So archaeology, as I said before, is necessarily a material science. We absolutely have a focus on objects, and some of those objects are unique, and have beautiful craftsmanship, and like this pin from a Macnac Bridge, or they're rare, like this example of a porpoise vertebrae with a stone tool tip stuck in it, and some cut marks from another graze from another spear that went into it. And so with some fancy graphics, we can use that to look a little bit at trajectories of the spear being thrown, etc. We might be able to generate how hard it was thrown. Things like that. Fun research, right? The unique things that you get to do. But mostly, other than objects, what archaeologists really, really focus on are the relationships between objects, right? So, for example, what does a clustering of stone mean? Right? It could mean nothing if you just uncovered it one at a time or pulled it out of a wall, but you uncover it carefully and you look at it and you can see that it's been intentionally placed, and you have house walls, and you have a hearth feature, and you have storage pits, And so looking at it all together is really key to understanding the story of the site. Likewise, we don't just take one or two objects, we collect them all, because even though these all look very similar, they're all spear points, bone spear points. By having the entire collection and looking at it, we can see that the people at Summer Bay, which is where this is from, were actually recycling their bone points. They weren't making them different types for different reasons, to look a little different or to serve a slightly different purpose. These bone points, some of them started out even taller than this, but they get used, they get broken, they get recovered, and they get recycled to be used again until they're done. And so when we look at the relationships of these in archaeological collections, we have so much more information than if we just looked at a spear point on its own. So, that said, when sites are vandalized or looted, or it's like taking books out of a page, right? We already are missing a lot of those pages because most of what's been used in these people's lives over these thousands of years is organic and it's decayed. We don't get to see it. Think about all the clothing, all the boat parts, etc. We just don't get to see those. So when a site is destroyed by vandalism or by erosion and natural causes, we're losing a great part of that story. So here at MODA, in keeping with our mission, we pretty firmly believe that archaeology is for the public, that it is not something to be locked away in the halls of academia, and that the research that's done as archaeology should be shared with the public. And it's for public consumption. We also believe that we all share a responsibility in protecting the archaeology of our region. Here in the Bering, especially here in the northern latitudes, we're seeing increased storminess. Coastal sites are in danger all across the north. Living villages are in danger across the north because of this increased storminess and with sea level rise. And so these are things that threaten archaeological sites in the present. And then, of course, as we know all too well here on the Macnac Island, for example, theft and looting can really damage the archaeological record that we have to look at. I know It was normal for the time, but during World War II, we lost a lot of material here because soldiers were collecting things to take home with them as souvenirs. And, and that is it's something we can't condone today. So towards that end, sort of combating these, to bringing these two things together, MODA has a strong commitment to a community archaeology, which means, and we've had a long-standing practice at MODA. Rick Connect was very engaged with the public. I hear from people who dug with Rick at numerous different sites all around Unalaska, and I think that, or worked in the lab here, and I think that there was a real strong relationship between the community and the archaeologists at the museum at that time. We've revived the community archaeology program as of 2017 with the goal of creating a community of informed and trained and engaged stewards of archaeological sites. So what does that look like? So we began at Summer Bay in 2017. The site was severely threatened from erosion at the time. Some of you may remember the creek coming out of Summer Lake had switched its route, was cutting into the very unconsolidated dune sediments and uncovered an archaeological site and was literally stripping it away day by day. And concerned community members came to the museum, let us know that this was happening. We had been out there. And our solution was to begin excavations immediately to try to recover what was left before it was lost to the eventual erosion of stormy seas and sea level rise. Although the creek is back in its old channel now, so that the immediate threat at least was alleviated. But as I said, we began those excavations in June of 2017. We had 2 interns from the Q tribe to help us, Henry and Scotty. We ended up that year with 3 graduate students, all of them very capable and eager, excellent help, and then 2 visiting archaeologists. In total, the museum logged 105 volunteer hours that summer, and we had 20 community participants. And we've just gone up from there. We got so busy with it, we stopped keeping track of the numbers as well, so I can't give you any more numbers beyond that first year. But it was quite successful. And we kept up this pace in 2018 and again 2019. In 2000, we expanded the site, made more room to dig. In 2018, we had Roberta Gordoroff, another archaeologist in the region, come out to help us. Here's these 3 graduate students and one of our professional archaeologists, a colleague from Kansas. And here we have the very beginning, first day, Henry and Scotty helping Jenny to get the site laid in and set up. So all in all, it was quite successful. The findings from this, it was an unusual archaeological site, so I would really say that the biggest finding was that we got such good feedback. Unalaska Loves Archaeology was awesome. The site itself seems to be a short-term use camp. There were no substantial structures or evidence of the substantial structures having been used there. We saw lots of blue mussel and urchin harvested, and we had a midden deposit that was not a consistent midden across a great amount of space, but it would look like just basket dumps of fish and shell, mixed in with a fairly ephemeral campsite. A little bit of chipstone, a little bit of whalebone, and very little other sea mammal bone, although we did absolutely recover a lot of fish bone. That is certain. It took us through the winter and summer of 2020 to process all of this material. As you can see, Tom is still sorting out 20 midden from UNL 208 during the pandemic. And I'll just add that we've just finished that. It's in August of this year. We cataloged only 300 items. As I said, it was relatively light scatter material, so it wasn't a hugely rich site. But 300 items, which we had help getting them washed, processed, inventoried, bagged, and housed appropriately. And yes, just finalized that last month. So we're in good shape there. And we probably won't go back to that site. I think we've gotten all we can get out of that. There's probably a small amount of material that may be lost to erosion, but I think we've learned quite a bit of what there is to learn from this particular location. So in 2021, we started at a new site for our community archaeology project in Agnes Beach. And this one was interesting because we didn't approach this one because it was eroding and being threatened. We approached it because it was two things. There were some key research questions that we are interested in addressing. And the second reason is that it's really close to town and really simple to work, on a daily basis with a busload of kids, as I'll show you. So the key research questions for Agnes Beach, though, were it was a long-standing site. We knew it was there. It had briefly been tested in the 90s, and there are at least two levels of cultural deposits, and we have two different radiocarbonates. So we have a 3,000-year-old layer, which is nice. That fits right into the Macnac phase, maybe Margaret Bay phase, kind of typical for around this area. But we also have a 6,000-year-old site level at that site. And so we're really hoping to get down to that 6,000-year-old level where we can fill the gap and look a little more closely at what might have been going on during the later part of the Anagula phase, that little gap I mentioned. So we have high hopes for the site. We began our excavations there in 2021. Again, we had two visiting archaeologists to help us out. That was Nicole Massardi and Caroline Funk. We're here collecting some specimens from our faunal collections to facilitate their research on paleoenvironment of the region. And they were happy to join us out in the field, and so we had great help. We expanded on our excavations in 2022, and we had funding from the Alaska Community Foundation grant, GCI Gives, PICTA, and the Cute Tribe. And in the case of the PICTA and the Cute Tribe, they were supplying interns for us again. So we had Riley Lakanoff and Alicia Peters for us for the whole summer to do archaeology. Again, we had three visiting archaeologists. We brought in our colleagues from Kansas, and Dr. Mike Livingston was also here to help us on this work. We got ambitious. We offered this community program as a class for the youth through the PCR. So we worked with 13 children between the ages of 7 and 13. And it was a lot. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of wild. And it was, I think, a lot of learning, because some of the feedback I've heard from some of the parents are the kids just soaked it up like a sponge. And so we had a great time, that's for sure. It was a lot of fun. So here you see the crew getting ready for the dig. We've got our intern Alicia. Here's Riley helping get us started, down getting the overburden removed. And then here's the museum crew getting ready to go. So we started out with bringing the kids into the museum and kind of just trying to give them an overview of what archaeology looks like, because it's not all Indiana Jones, you know, and those special gold items. It looks a lot like, you know, fishbone and little flakes and all that. But they took to it. They took to it really well. And so coming out armed, knowing what they were looking for in the field, they just jumped right in, and we had a great time. And I'm actually impressed with the quality of the work. I mean, we had 4 adults looking after them, but the quality of the work was actually better than I've seen with some undergraduates. You know, it was pretty awesome. They're very enthusiastic and really interested. Every now and again, we have a special find, like a projectile point here. We got Alicia working the screen again, always doing a good job. In total, we opened 8 1-by-1 meter units, and we exceeded our goals. The kids did so well that we made it through even more than I thought we would at the beginning of the summer, and that was in 2 weeks. So all in all, a success that I hope we can repeat again next year. Looking ahead to 2023, we certainly will be out in the field, but moving into, just want to let everybody know, anyone who might be interested in volunteering, that we can do archaeology in the lab as well as we can do it in the field. All winter long, we've got work to do. We've got sorting, we've got artifact washing, we've got rehousing, building boxes for the material that needs to go into the collections room, relabeling and rebagging, basically bringing everything up to curatorial standards, working with the artifacts. And so there's lots to do, and I hope that some of you might want to take advantage of that and join us for the community archaeology, as we sort of just kind of keep it going, and that's the goal, really. So that's all I have for the evening. Thank everybody, our sponsors and funders and supporters, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Dick.
So I'm kind of interested in how you go about first identifying the site, and second of all, the tools that you use. I noticed those lines are super straight, so we must be using some surveying instrument or something like that. What are the typical tools that you would use to investigate a site like that?
Well, thanks for the compliment on the straight lines. Those ones were laid in with a tape and compass.
Okay.
So, yeah, and then triangulating to get the right angles, right? And so, thank you. And another part of the world, we might work with some more sophisticated distance measuring, laser distance measuring equipment or GPS to do that. But we managed here with the old-fashioned way. We typically dig with hand trowels, like they're mason's trowels, but they look like what you would use in your garden.
Okay.
And keeping those walls straight is a challenge. And honestly, I didn't find it any more challenging with the kids than I have with undergraduates. It's just, you gotta do it a bunch before you can do it, And so it's just getting them moving along a little earlier in life. Yeah.
So at the Captain's Bay, or at the Agnes Beach site, you said that it goes back 6,000 years, but are you working the 3,000-year-old layer now? And I mean, how did you know, or did you do a little sump hole, gut shot it to see how deep it goes, and then carbon date it to figure out that it goes back that far? Now you guys are just going to continue taking it down?
All of the above. That's correct, yeah. We knew it had 2 levels because Rick did a quick test in 1999, I think it was. He identified 2 clear cultural levels with animal bone in them. He got radiocarbon dates on both of those. So that's how we know we were working with 3,000 and 6,000. We're currently targeting the 3,000-year-old level. That's where we're at right now. And we don't have radiocarbon dates to go with that yet, but everything is consistent with 3,000. It's what we'd be surprised if it comes back different. But we'll see.
So, just to kind of get an idea, at what depth is 3,000 years compared to the 6,000 years? Like, how far under are we talking? Like, per 1,000 years, like, what's an average depth?
Well, that's pretty tough. That's tricky because it's going to be site by site because so much can happen
Deposits.
in those thousands of years, including things being deposited and things being eroded. And so, depth can't really equal time. It's the layers that equal older and younger.
Gotcha.
You know, and so we're seeing our 3,000-year-old at this particular location. We're seeing our 3,000-year-old layer about 50 centimeters or 2 feet, let's say, below the current surface. We're on a hilltop.
Right.
Those upper 2 feet are churned up and all kinds of messy from World War II activities, and so including being full of artifacts, probably from the other parts of the site that have been dug up and then tossed up ahead when they were digging their pits, foxholes and whatnot during World War II.
So how deep is the 6,000-year-old?
We expected. Rick found it within, I think, 15 inches or less of the bottom of the 3,000. So we're expecting that, but of course those things undulate a lot, so it's hard to say where it's going to show up exactly in our block. Now, we did do one, as you suggested, an auger down, and we only did one, but we did start to pick up sea mammal bone just exactly about where Rick had seen it too. So we're hopeful that it won't be too much deeper than where we're at. Yeah, but it's, in terms of like how fast things stack up, it's completely variable across
Makes sense.
conditions. Yeah.
I was talking to a guy today who works for GCI, and they're about to lay fiber optic trenches and so on and so forth. And he was saying, when they dug in the past, they find all sorts of really interesting, Russian lakes and stuff like that. I mean, how do you handle that in the museum? And what's your relationship with, public infrastructural folks?
It's a great question. This museum has occasionally handled what we call that kind of private sector regulation compliance work on a small scale. Rick the previous director of a few decades back, did it on a fairly big scale, but we're not set up here to have an office to handle that. Our archaeology is more research focused and facilitating researchers with our collections. That said, we are the repository for what they're pulling out of that very trench that you're talking about. So our relationship as the museum is to just serve as the place that they can deposit their archaeology when they're finished with it, after they're finished with the project. And they do have, I'm sure they mentioned to you, they have cultural monitors on that.
Not really. I mean,
Oh,
we just had
Yeah.
this was just a guy, who does the work. So.
Yeah. Well, and so because of the federal funds that are involved, it all falls under Section 106, and so it's becomes a very large archaeological project to get these tubes in the ground, right? And so you have here actually the team who's in charge of making sure that is covered. Yeah. So the way that works is a company like GCI hires out to a consulting firm who does archaeology and compliance regulation, and they put people on the ground to meet the state's requirements for oversight and compliance.
And what happens to all the junk that comes out of there?
It depends. I mean, if it's it's a pre-contact site, it'll get curated. If the site it'll be curated and it'll be curated here at the museum. That's the arrangement. But a lot of stuff comes out that's just not collectible. Most of the deposits are disturbed already, and so you're going to see, fragments of wood and lumber that are from a World War II building, but it's not something that's going to end up in the collections in this context. Now, I hope you guys mark it down where all the buildings are buried, because that's important, like on a map. But yeah, the scraps.
Yeah, I mean,
the
that's
scraps
part
of
of what I'm
metal.
interested in is how the village then, compares to the way that buildings and structures like that are now, how the maps overlay.
Yeah, and that part
So-
is being documented. Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of these sites have been found because there was construction going on and they've like flagged it. I mean, yeah, downtown, people installing water lines and water mains and things, and this is where they've like found things, including the Agnes Beach site. I was working for the construction company when Rick came by there and we're like, hey, you might want to check this out.
They put it in that road.
Yeah, that's how things go here. You can't really move the ground too much without coming up
Finding
with something.
something.
Yeah. Did you guys have anything more you wanted to say
No,
about the
Yeah, I was
collection?
just gonna say, if you do have questions, all three of us would be happy to answer them. I don't want to hijack the talk now,
No,
going into everything, but I'll catch you after the talk and give you my contact info.
Cool, like,
Kale, did you see any differences from site to site? Say, for instance, I don't know, from Margaret Bay or Summer Bay to the one just recently. Which was?
Agnes Beach.
What's that?
Agnes Beach?
Yeah, Agnes Beach. I mean, anything that's like, oh, this is really interesting, and then
Truthfully, they all fall into line, if you will, with that sequence that I showed you, the kinds of things we expect at certain time periods, right? And so we know enough about the archaeology in this region that something would stand out. And so of the ones we've looked at, I would say that Summer Bay did stand out in that we don't get a look at ephemeral campsites very often, right? What we really see are village sites. And, part of that may be because it's in a dune setting, and dunes are very unstable. They're shifting all the time through, in geologic time, but we can watch it with our own eyes happening as well, right? And so maybe there was something there that didn't last, or maybe it was a poor place to build a village, or maybe it's just so maybe it just fits into a different aspect of the settlement system, and one that we don't see very often because we see the villages.
Right.
Yeah. So finding a handful of lithics, a little bit of shell, a little bit of fish bone, a little bit of everything, but in real, just very lighter numbers.
Okay.
So nothing that would say, oh, that's different than everything else in terms of it can't be an ungun or something like that.
Yeah.
But absolutely a different kind of use of the space than we see other places. Yeah. Susie?
Kind of a question along the same line. When you showed that earlier slide of some of the, not features, but some of the finds that were typical of the different state ages.
Yes.
Like early on was certain things would show you that was it. So I was surprised at the late Aleutian, the most recent stage, when you said that slate ooze began to show up.
Mhm.
Did they not show up before? Was it slate that didn't show up, or just ooze in general? Because that seems surprising to me.
So the ulu tends to show up in that time frame. Yeah, you can push it back a little bit here and there, but it's about a 1,000-year time frame for the ulus in this part of the world. You can get them further east, much earlier, of course.
Any idea why they wouldn't have showed up before? I mean, you'd think that working with skin and using ooze would have been something that would go way back, but was there a different tool that was being used then, or?
Probably a chipstone knife of some kind. Yeah, it's a real clear example of something just appearing in the art, just appearing over however many generations, but yeah. And it points to contact to the east, where they were very common for much longer. Yeah. One thing that is really interesting though is that the slate ulus must be traded because slate isn't available here, right? But it's available on the peninsula and around Kodiak. But here we see people didn't always get slate, but they had the idea for the shape of that knife, and so then they would make it out of what's locally available, the salt. And so sometimes it would be ground like slate, but oftentimes they'd also have to chip the edges because it just doesn't grind to as fine a point as slate does. Yeah. So there's an adaptation. It's like we want that tool type. But we don't have the material, so we're gonna make it our way. Yeah. So that's an interesting connection.